There's a strange moment that happens to almost everyone in their 20s or 30s. You get a small windfall, maybe a work bonus, maybe some savings finally adds up to a real number. Maybe you just got a raise and suddenly have breathing room for the first time in your adult life. And the very first thought that crosses your mind isn't, what should I do with this? It's, I should talk to someone who knows what they're doing. That instinct feels mature, responsible even. You're not going to gamble with your future, so you go find an expert. But here's a question almost nobody asks before making that call. What if the expert's paycheck depends on you never fully understanding what they're doing with your money? Not because they're lying to you, not because they're cartoonishly corrupt, but because an entire industry has been quietly built on a foundation that rewards your confusion far more than it rewards your success. Once you see how this works, you'll start noticing it everywhere, in bank ads, in those slick Instagram posts from wealth coaches, in the guy at the seminar with the laser pointer, and the retirement horror stories. And once you see it, you genuinely can't unsee it. So let's pull back the curtain on the thing the financial advice industry would really rather you never think too hard about. Here's the quiet belief most people in their 20s and 30s carry around without ever saying it out loud. Money is complicated, and I'm probably not smart enough to handle it on my own. It sounds like humility. It actually sounds kind of responsible. But flip it around for a second. Who taught you that belief? Think back. Did anyone in school ever sit you down and explain, in plain language, how an index fund works, or what compounding actually does over 30 years, or how a retirement account grows? Probably not. Most of us learned algebra we'd never use again, but never learned the one subject that would follow us for the rest of our lives. Into that gap walks an entire industry, ready and willing to fill the silence. And it doesn't fill it with simple, clear answers. It fills it with just enough fear and just enough confusion to make you feel like you need a guide, a translator, someone to stand between you and your own money. Here's a scene you've probably lived through or watched a friend live through. You sit down across from a financial advisor. They've got a tablet, maybe a printed folder with your name on the cover, and a calm, confident voice. They start asking questions about your goals, your risk tolerance, your family. It feels personal. It feels like care. Then somewhere in that conversation, they start using phrases like diversified growth portfolio, or guaranteed income riders, or tax advantage structures. And something happens in your brain. You stop following the details and start just nodding, hoping your face looks like you understand. You're not stupid. You've just been handed a wall of vocabulary specifically designed to make a fairly simple decision feel like brain surgery. This is the moment the entire industry is built around, and almost nobody clocks it while it's happening. Let's slow this down and look at exactly how this works, piece by piece, because every layer of this reveals something a little more interesting than the last. Here's a question that sounds simple but trips up almost everyone. Who pays your financial advisor, and how? Most people assume it works like a doctor's visit. You pay a fee, you get advice, that's the whole transaction. But a huge portion of the financial advice world doesn't work that way. Instead, advisors are often paid commissions, meaning every time they place you into a certain investment, a certain insurance policy, a certain fund, the company behind that product pays the advisor a cut. Picture this like a real estate agent who only shows you houses from one particular builder because that builder happens to pay a bigger commission than anyone else on the block. The houses might be fine, but you're never seeing the full market. You're seeing the version of the market that profits the person showing you around. This doesn't mean every advisor is secretly working against you. Most genuinely believe in what they're recommending, but human psychology is sneaky. When your income depends on a certain answer being the right answer, you start believing that answer more easily, even without realizing you're doing it. It's not deception, it's bias, quietly built into the business model itself. This next part is where most people's eyes glaze over, and that's exactly the problem, because boredom is doing a lot of damage here. Let's use a story instead of a spreadsheet. Imagine two roommates, both 25 years old, both starting to invest the same month with the same amount of money. One of them puts their money into something with a low ongoing fee, let's call it 0.5% a year. The other puts their money into something that sounds almost identical, but charges 1.5% a year. On paper, that 1% difference looks like nothing. Rounding error, not worth a second thought. Fast forward 35 years. One roommate retires with significantly more money, sometimes well over $100,000 more, despite making the exact same contributions the entire time. Same effort, same discipline. The only difference was a fee that felt too small to matter. Here's why. Investments don't just grow once. They grow on top of their own growth, year after year, a snowball rolling downhill and picking up more snow every rotation. Fees take a cut of that snowball every single year, which means they're not just taking a small slice once. They're taking a small slice of an ever-growing pile for decades. Think of it like a tiny hole in the bottom of a bucket you're using to fill a swimming pool. One drip a minute looks irrelevant, but leave that bucket running for 30 years and you'll have lost an entire pool's worth of water without ever seeing a single dramatic leak. This is exactly why fees that sound microscopic in a meeting can quietly cost you a small fortune by the time you actually need the money. Here's a question worth sitting with. Who actually benefits from personal finance feeling difficult? If your friend explained investing to you in 2 minutes using a simple comparison, something like, think of it as buying a tiny slice of thousands of companies at once and just leaving it alone for a long time, you'd probably get it instantly. It's not actually that complicated, but that's not usually how it's presented. Instead, you get pages of vocabulary, expense ratios, asset classes, risk-adjusted returns, tax loss harvesting. Until the whole topic feels like a locked door, you need a professional key to open. Compare that to something you already understand well, like ordering food delivery. If an app charged you a confusing mix of platform fees, service fees, and small order fees, all stacked on top of each other, you'd immediately feel like something shady was happening because you understand food delivery. You're not intimidated by it. Most people were simply never taught the basics of money the same way they were taught to read a menu. And that gap isn't an accident nobody bothered to fix. Confusion keeps people dependent, and dependent customers don't ask hard questions about fees, because how do you question something you don't fully understand? Now here's the part that explains why so much financial marketing feels oddly stressful to watch. Are you prepared if the market crashes the year before you retire? What happens to your family if something happens to you? Inflation is silently destroying your savings right now. These aren't random scare tactics. They're carefully chosen because fear changes how your brain makes decisions. When you're afraid, you stop comparing options carefully. You stop shopping around. You want relief, and you want it fast. This is why a nervous person sitting across from a confident advisor is, frankly, an extremely easy sell. Not because the advisor is twisting their arm, but because fear has already done most of the persuading before the advisor even opens their folder. Picture someone walking alone at night who hears footsteps behind them. In that moment, they're not weighing the pros and cons of different escape routes. They just want to feel safe immediately. Certain financial products are sold the exact same way, less like a calculated long-term plan and more like an emergency exit from anxiety. The problem is, decisions made from fear are rarely the same decisions you'd make with a clear head. And the financial industry has learned, whether consciously or simply through decades of trial and error, that fear sells far more reliably than patience ever will. One more layer, and this one catches even people who think they're too savvy to fall for it. You've seen the phrase, free consultation, no cost to you. We get paid by the company, not by you. It sounds generous, like a gift. But ask the question that applies to nearly every free offer you'll ever encounter in any industry. If this costs nothing for me, how exactly is the person offering it making money? In a lot of cases, the advisor isn't paid directly by you in that meeting. They're paid by the financial product you eventually get placed into, a fund, a policy, an account, which often comes with fees that quietly continue for years, sometimes for the rest of your life. The free meeting isn't charity. It's the entry point to a relationship designed to generate revenue long after you've forgotten the conversation even happened. This doesn't mean every free consultation is a trap waiting to spring, but the single most useful question you can ask in any financial relationship is this: who is paying this person, and what specifically do they get paid more for recommending? If you can't answer that clearly, you're missing the most important piece of information in the entire room. Now let's connect all 5 of these layers into the one idea that ties everything together, because this is the part that actually changes how people think about money for good. The financial advice industry's biggest secret isn't a scandal hiding in the fine print. It's structural. The system, as a whole, profits more from your confusion and your fear than it does from your actual financial success. and the more dependent you feel, the more profitable you become. This isn't a conspiracy where executives gather around a table plotting to keep an entire generation confused. It's something far more ordinary and far more human. Over decades, the industry simply learned which approaches generate the most revenue, and confusion plus fear, it turns out, sells dramatically better than simplicity and patience ever will. So the industry naturally drifted toward what worked, the same way water finds the lowest path downhill without anyone needing to plan it that way on purpose. Here's the psychological truth hiding underneath all of this. Most people don't actually fear losing money as much as they fear making the wrong decision and having no one else to blame for it. Financial decisions feel permanent, even when they often aren't, and that feeling of permanence is exhausting to sit with alone. So when someone confident offers to make the decision for you, you're not just buying advice, you're buying relief from the discomfort of choosing. Here's a comparison that captures this well. Picture two people learning to swim. One gets handed an inflatable life vest that never comes off. They feel safe instantly, they never sink, but they also never actually learn to swim because the vest is doing all the work. The other person struggles for a while, swallows some pool water, gets frustrated, but eventually learns to swim confidently on their own for the rest of their life. A large part of the financial industry sells life vests that are quietly designed to never come off. Not because swimming is secretly impossible to learn, but because a permanently dependent swimmer keeps paying for the vest forever. This doesn't mean every advisor is a villain or that financial advice is something to avoid entirely. Plenty of advisors operate honestly and genuinely put their clients first. The issue has never really been about individual people. It's about a structure that quietly rewards dependence over independence and rewards confusion over clarity, simply because that's what produces the most consistent long-term revenue. Once you understand that structure, your entire relationship with financial advice changes. Instead of asking, "What should I do with my money?" which puts you in a passive, dependent position from the very first sentence, you start asking a far more powerful question. Who benefits if I keep believing I can't figure this out myself? That single question costs nothing, and it's worth more than most financial seminars you'll ever sit through. So what do you actually do with this, especially if you're somewhere in your 20s or 30s trying to figure out how to build wealth without falling into every trap along the way? First, learn the fundamentals yourself, even if it feels intimidating at first. You don't need a finance degree. You need maybe 5 core ideas: how compounding works, what fees genuinely cost over 30 years, the difference between something simple like a broad index fund and a complicated bundled product, why time invested usually matters more than perfect timing, and what your own risk tolerance actually feels like in practice, not just on a questionnaire. That's it. That handful of ideas makes you nearly immune to most fear-based sales pitches because fear thrives on uncertainty, and uncertainty shrinks fast once you understand the basics. Second, always ask exactly how the person advising you gets paid, not in vague terms. Specifically, flat fee regardless of recommendation, percentage of your account every year, commission tied to certain products. This one question reveals more about whose side they're really on than almost anything else said in the entire meeting. Third, treat unnecessary complexity as a red flag, not a sign of expertise. If something takes 20 minutes to explain and you still don't understand it, that's usually not a reflection of your intelligence. It's often a sign the product was built to be difficult to evaluate on purpose. When it comes to long-term wealth building, simple and boring tends to outperform complicated and exciting more often than people expect. Fourth, separate fear-driven decisions from actual financial decisions. Before reacting to a scary headline, a market dip, or an anxious conversation with a friend, give it a few days. Almost nothing in personal finance genuinely requires an immediate, panicked decision. The moves that feel most urgent in the moment are often the ones you'll regret most in hindsight. Fifth, know that the goal isn't necessarily to do everything completely alone forever. Plenty of people benefit from working with an honest, transparent advisor, and there's nothing wrong with wanting help. The real goal is simply this: never feel like you have no choice but to blindly trust someone purely because the topic feels too intimidating to question. Confidence with money doesn't mean knowing everything. It means knowing enough to recognize a good answer and notice immediately when you're not getting one. Put those 5 habits together, and something shifts. You stop being the easiest possible customer for an industry that profits from confusion, and you start using that same industry, advisors, platforms, tools, entirely on your own terms instead of theirs. Here's the idea worth carrying with you long after this video ends. The single most expensive thing in personal finance has never really been a bad investment, a market crash, or even a hidden fee buried somewhere in a 30-page document. The most expensive thing has always been believing you're not capable of understanding your own money in the first place. That belief didn't come from nowhere. The industry didn't have to invent it. It simply found that quiet assumption already living inside most of us, planted somewhere between a school system that never taught this and a culture that treats money as something mysterious, even a little taboo to discuss openly. And once that belief existed, an entire system grew up around gently reinforcing it, because a confident, informed person is simply much harder to profit from than a confused, anxious one. But here's the genuinely good news hiding inside all of this. That belief was never actually true. Money isn't some secret language reserved for a gifted few. It's a skill, the same as cooking, or driving, or learning a new language, something almost anyone can pick up with the right information explained simply, honestly, and without unnecessary fear baked into every sentence. So the next time someone tries to make your finances feel urgent, complicated, or frightening, take a breath and ask yourself that same question one more time. Who benefits if I keep believing I can't figure this out myself? Because the moment you stop asking what to do with your money and start asking who profits from your confusion, you take back something far more valuable than any single product or piece of advice could ever hand you. You take back the steering wheel, and that, more than any secret this industry has ever quietly protected, is what actually builds wealth.